try speaking all these chords.
And I'm in the shot here.
Can you
On the
see your
iPhone?
face
I
against
did
the
like
shadow?
We're really only worried about your face.
Oh.
So everything's directed at you.
Okay. I don't mind if you guys
We're like an accent to it all. So.
Okay.
Okay. All right, ready? It's just a conversation. Okay, one more test for everyone.
Hello. Hello.
Okay.
Hello?
Lily.
Hello.
Cool. Okay. Sounds good for you?
Mm-hmm. Hi, Lily. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I feel like I've been manifesting this episode for a while because I've just been so interested in gut health, and I feel like neither of us are experts about gut health, and so yeah, we're excited to hear the knowledge that you have to just enlighten us about this.
All right, yeah.
We've both been very interested in this as far as just like overall health and taking care of our bodies the best we know how, but we were like, we should get someone on here who really knows what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Here to help.
Okay. Well, let us know a little bit more about you, your background, where you're from, and how you ended up in San Francisco.
All right, so about me, I'm from in SoCal actually.
Okay.
So I'm from a place called Tahunga. I know a lot of people don't know where that is. So props to anyone who does know where that is. But it's just a small little town where I grew up with my single parent household and my brother and sister. And I went to, the only thing that's like more prominent from that town that I can think of is my high school was used as a filming location for a lot of things. So for movies and TV shows and music videos.
Like what movies?
I don't know the movies, but I can tell you the music video.
Okay, what music video?
It's the My Chemical Romance teenager song.
Okay.
Because a lot of my
Gosh.
classmates were in that little like mosh pit area thing in their video.
That's
So-
so funny.
I was like, okay, that's cool. It's in a lot of movies. I just can't remember right now.
We'll have to go back and watch that music video now.
Yeah,
Because
we'll
that's
look
a
at it
super
with
cool
new
little
eyes.
song.
Yeah, there is a wiki page on it, so of all the different filming things that were there. Yeah, and then what brought me to San Francisco is my fiance actually. So he is a native SF person, and he bought a practice here. He actually right across the street, so we'll have like
Oh my
lunch right here in
gosh.
the corner.
I love that.
So yeah, that's how I ended up in San Francisco.
Very cool. Have you been here for a long time, or just within the last few years?
I officially moved here in 2020 because of the pandemic, so that's when he bought the practice over there, and I'm officially like a resident here now. But prior to that, when we were dating, it was just like back and forth between NorCal and SoCal.
Okay. How'd you meet? Because if you were in SoCal. Yeah.
Oh, so we went to the same college. We went to UCLA together.
Okay, nice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
No worries. Cool.
Well, so how did you become interested in health? Has that been something you've always been drawn to, or?
Yeah, so for health, I was personally interested in it. In 6th grade, they had like, the cells that you would make from styrofoam. So I really liked that because I really liked arts and crafts, and that's kind of how it started off first. And then like 7th grade is when you had like the health classes, and I specifically remember a project we had that was like a really long project where you had to make the different systems of the body. So you went through like the skeletal and the muscular, and I just thought that was really cool. And I think because one of my best aspects of myself, I guess, was that I had good memory. So a lot of things in science, you can remember them through just through memorization. I learned later on that that's not enough. You have to like learn how to integrate everything. So that's when I got to like college and whatnot. But as a younger kid, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so smart because I remember all these things. And then my family members were in healthcare, so they were pharmacists. My mom's a nurse. My brother's a pharmacist now. My sister's going to nursing. So just all those together. And even growing up, my mom would say things like, eat this fruit, it's good for your skin, or eat this, it's good for digestion. And I'm just kind of like, where did that come from? Like, are you just telling me to eat it just so I should eat it? But then my grandma, she was into traditional Chinese medicine because I'm Asian. And she would say things like, don't eat this during the summer because it's considered a hot wind food and it like brings up the heat or energy in your body. And she's like, you should eat cooler wind foods. And I'm like, what does this mean? But it was always with me. And then and then I guess once I got into like graduate school, that's when I started getting into it more and more and more, right? Like when I was at UCLA, that's when I was a pre-med and I wanted to go into like what's conventional medicine, pediatric gastroenterology. You shadow all these doctors and you work in the hospital. I did research for them and I was just kind of like, this is great. I love learning all about this. And then as I looked into it further, that's when I worked into my way into a pediatric pain and palliative care. So it was at the Metellus Children's Hospital down in UCLA. And then because it's palliative care, it's kind of like end of life, and you have to really look into all the different aspects to make the little time that you have left like as best as it can be. So it's increasing quality of life. And they would look into other therapies like yoga or just try to reduce pain in anything, right? So yoga and acupuncture. And when I started looking into how other modes of therapy could be used, I was like, okay, so it's not just drugs. You can also look into all these other things. And that's when I kind of clicked that preventative medicine is just as important. And that's where I made the switch over to nutrition, just because I thought that was the equivalent of like gastroenterology and nutrition. I was like, it's both dealing with food in the GI tract. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Nice.
Yes.
And what's your like official title?
So I'll be doctor of clinical nutrition, and my title is certified nutrition specialist. So it's very similar to a registered dietitian, except it's like the functional holistic version of it, because we have to take into account like a lot of different aspects of the way you digest food. It's not just like, okay, so here's your food, eat it as it is. It's more like how does relationships with people affect the way you digest food, right? Like if someone's in a really toxic environment or relationship with work or other people, that affects how you digest your food. You get the gut feeling of things, right? So
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited for this conversation because everything you're saying is, I feel like so much of just aligns with our belief system as far as like there's outside things other than just like what are you putting in your body? It's like what's your environment like? What are your relationships like? So that holistic perspective on things is really nice to hear from someone who's like a practitioner, you know what I mean? Because I feel like so much in the Western world of medicine, it can just be so clinical where it's just like black and white rather than like what's your environment like, what's going on in your life. So that's really cool.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, because like Danielle said, we were so interested in gut health, and all she did was just like look up gut practitioners and experts in San Francisco. So I'm so glad we found you.
Yay!
I know, and then when we had our first conversation on the phone, like you kind of did mention a little bit that you're more into like the overall health, and it's not just like you said, just Western medicine. And it sounds like you even have background with, like your grandma in like Chinese medicine. I just think there's so many different factors that are so important. Like we can't just focus on one thing and be like, this is gonna heal me. So yeah, I just feel like you have a really unique and like really amazing perspective on health.
Thanks. I do want to make it clear that I think there's a time and place for conventional medicine, and I think there's a time and place for preventative medicine, and they work best when used together.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, like, you know, like carrots and vitamin K and all that stuff, it's good for the blood and stuff, but if I'm kind of bleeding out on the floor, I'm not gonna
100%.
hope for carrots to heal me. I'm gonna go to the emergency room and hope that
Totally.
the medicines will help me heal me,
For
right?
sure.
Yeah,
sure.
so time and place for both.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's always a balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
always a
Yeah.
balance. Yeah, and I feel like this conversation, if anyone's listening, it's hopefully they're not in a place where they're bleeding out and need to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
If you need to go to the doctor, please go.
Yes.
But if you're just looking for more information on the gut and how you can just kind of, you know, preventatively better your own health, I think this will be a great place for them to find some great information.
Yeah.
So I guess the next question is, you know, what is your philosophy on nutrition?
So, personally, my philosophy is that you should eat happily and you should eat healthily as well. So it's not one and you can only have one and not the other. I think you can have both. So when you're eating healthily, it doesn't mean it has to be like, oh, I'm so like deprived of things. Like you should be able to enjoy your food as you're eating these foods that are more nutrient dense, right? And then professionally, it's supposed to be things like eat food that not only tastes good but does good for your body. So they're kind of tied in together. Just the fact that like I do like food that does good for my body, but I want to enjoy it as well. It's
Totally.
like the taste of the food, the texture, the flavors, right? They all come together. But it's also like who do you eat with, and what's the environment that you're eating the food with, because that also affects your eating experience.
Mhm.
So I think together that's what I think about healthy foods. And I put quotes because a lot of times people don't like to hear the word healthy, so I would rather just say like, okay, nutrient dense foods, because there's not so much good and bad foods per se. Like if I'm in a desert and the only things I have are M&Ms and cake, I'm gonna eat that because it's for survival.
Right.
It may not be as nutrient dense as like, I don't know, fish and kale salad at the time, but it does its job to give you energy, right? It's just some give more than others. Some give extra things that other ones might not have.
Totally.
And I never really thought about that perspective of like the environment in which you eat it. Like I really never thought about that, but it makes so much sense. It's like, are you stressed? Are you eating really quickly? Are you like being intentional about the way you're eating? Like who are you sitting with? Like that's such a big, I've just never thought about it like that before, but it makes so much sense. That would affect everything. You said it even affects like digestion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that look like?
So imagine if you're like at work and your boss is like, I need this project done by today. And you're just like, well, I'm just gonna hoard my food down and just do it in 10 minutes. Well, your brain's not getting this sense of like, okay, my stomach's expanding because I'm waiting for the food to hit my stomach, and therefore it'll send the signals up saying like, hey, these stretch receptors are going out. You're filling up with food, therefore you're probably supposed to get full right about now. If you're going really fast, it's not gonna get that signal. It's just gonna be like, okay, this disconnect here and here. Not only that, when you're chewing your food, you're being more intentional about how long it takes for it to go through your system. And that mechanical chewing actually helps your GI tract, because not only does it break it down here in your mouth, it breaks it down here in your stomach, and all that together is going to help you absorb your food better. When it's as small as it can possibly be, your body's going to be like, and absorb it more easily versus like if you had huge chunks of it. If you have huge chunks of it going down, that makes more work for like your stomach to break it down if it's proteins, and if it's going to be like fats, you need more bile from your liver and gallbladder. So especially if you don't have like a gallbladder, it makes it even harder at that point. So it's kind of like, why don't you just make it a little easier by trying to break down as much as you can up here, or even like outside environment. You can just cut your food up smaller and then bring it in, so it's like less of a burden for the rest of your system.
Okay. Wow. Never even thought of that. As far as like chewing your food, like make sure you're chewing, or like you said, smaller bites. I've literally, I mean, like I know that just from growing up, I guess, and your parents telling you like slow down, or like make sure you chew your food, but like actually thinking about that when it hits your stomach, how that affects your digestion.
Yeah. I mean, when you also think about like Michelin star restaurants, or even those fancy restaurants where they give you like just a small little platter, and my mentality prior to going to nutrition school was like, I'm gonna get so hungry, I can't eat just that.
Yeah.
But they give like so much food in a stretched amount of time. So even though they give a little bit, they give you time to process it before they bring out the next plate. And by the time you get out to like the sixth plate, you're like, I am so full, I can't do this anymore. And they're like, well, you have 13 plates, so you got a lot more to go. Yeah, so having the time between different bites, it really does take an effect. And that if anyone's in the mindset like, oh, I need to manage my weight a little more, that could be a way to like prevent overeating, because you're not just eating mindlessly, you're being very conscientious of how much food's coming in, how much time's passing between. And that's why like when you're having conversations with people, when you talk, that does take up the space between each bite as well. Yeah.
So you would say it's healthier to eat with people in a way?
I mean, yeah, it's the social aspect of it, like
Yeah.
having the community around you when you're eating, because food is not just eating by yourself. Food is like a celebration with other people a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
So that involves a social aspect there.
Yeah, and I feel like there's kind of a disconnect as far as we all live in these like fast-paced, individualistic lives where that's something you have to like prioritize. It's like, I'm good. Danielle and I live together. We just moved in.
Oh my God!
Yeah, like a year ago, like this month, which is crazy. And that's one thing we really loved, is being able to eat together, because with the pandemic we were both living alone and just like really isolated.
Yeah.
And how much different that experience is when like we get to cook together and eat together. So who knew we were doing something for our digestive system?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you define a healthy gut?
So a healthy gut is one that I would say is very diverse. So we have a lot of bacterial species in our body. There's some that are better than others, because some can be more pathogenic and cause diseases and illnesses. Others are more like, I'm here for defense and to help you out. So having a wide variety of different types of bacteria is what I think is best. So specifically, there's a species called Lactobacillus, or there's also bifidobacteria, and you can find those in things like yogurt, right? If there's probiotics in it, you want to have live cultures. So one of the biggest examples I can say of this is when people are like, oh, what about kombucha? And I'm like, kombucha is great and all, but you have to also make sure they have live cultures in it. Because when you bottle it and process it, pasteurizing of anything, right, that heat kills off the bacteria. So it's kind of like, well, I mean, it's still good. And then there's some research where they said like even if there's dead bacteria, it might still be beneficial because it has like chemical structure there. But having live ones may be more recommended. But I mean, if you enjoy it, just enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
And then another portion of what includes a healthy gut is you want it to be a top-notch immune system defense mechanism, right? So you want to be able to fight off stressors because a large portion of your gut, specifically like 70% of 70 to 80% actually of your immune system sits right here with your gut, and they're highly interconnected. So if you imagine your body like a pipe, just like a regular, you can think of like a toilet roll or any kind of pipe, right? The outside portion is going to be like your skin. That's the main source of, or the first line of defense of anything trying to come into your body. So your skin's like, okay, I'm here, a physical barrier. But then there's the inside portion of that pipe. So that's the gut lining, and that's your internal barrier from the outside world. So you can imagine from our mouth all the way down here, we have food coming in, we have pathogens, we have toxins, bacteria, viruses like that, that come in, and then they're going to interact with that lining. And if there's any breakage or kind of holes in that barrier, they're going to come into our body. So if it's food, that could lead to like gut or food sensitivities. If it's like viruses, you're gonna get sick. Bacteria that shouldn't be there, you're gonna get sick again. So you want to have it so that it's a really well buffered wall, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the buffer would be the bacteria?
No, the buffer would be your gut lining.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the barrier between the outside world and inside world of your actual body. Because then once it goes to your gut, you can have it like either absorb the nutrients or it just gets your body eliminates it through your urine and feces.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how would you strengthen that gut lining?
So there's a lot of different nutrients in food. So they're what's known as phytonutrients are from plants. Phyto means plant, and the nutrients are just the beneficial plant chemicals that come with it. So an example is like the defenses that a plant would use to ward off like bugs that are trying to eat it or animals that are trying to eat it. It will release those defenses, and those are the chemicals, right? Or any kind of component of it. And that would be its defense system. But if we eat it, we can kind of like, it's like a what's yours is mine. We get those defense mechanisms as well. So like things like an example is mint. So mint has menthol in it, right? So it's that like nice cool feeling you get when you eat it. And that is actually to ward off the animals that want to eat it. So like things like ants or flies, when they try to eat the mint leaf, it makes them like, it's an anti-insectant or something like that, or anti-repellent for them, right? Anti-bug repellent. Yeah, there you go. So like it'll cause like flies to like continue to rub themselves so that they don't continue eating the mint, or it just tells the animals to get warded off, right? Whereas when we eat it, it's gonna be like, okay, well we can take these like I think they're monoterpenes, which is just another fancy way of saying some kind of chemical compound that we can use in our own body to help us with digestive issues. So when you eat mint, it helps with digestive upset, right? If you have stomach upset, it's antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, stuff like that. So you can utilize that as well.
That's interesting because I guess that goes hand in hand with anything medicinal, right? It's like, what are their properties? And I guess I've never thought about it like that, where it's like those plants use those properties as well to protect themselves.
Yeah.
So it's like,
And
again,
then entities.
Yeah.
the holistic connection to everything. I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. I had no idea.
My favorite is actually like pineapples. So pineapples have this thing called bromelain in it, and papayas have papain. And they're saying that's almost like it can act kind of like an aspirin for your body. So it's like the natural painkiller. Yeah. So
I've been on a papaya kick recently, so there we go. Maybe that's why
Your
I'm
body
feeling so good.
intuitively like, you need some papaya.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess going back to what you're saying with the bacteria, so then the bacteria sits within the gut lining, or
So it sits inside of our large intestine.
okay.
So when you think about the entire GI tract, you have your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, and then it goes into the small intestine, and your small intestine has like 3 main parts to it, and then once it goes out of your small intestine into your large intestine, that's where you'll see the bacteria kind of there. They will ferment any of the fibers, and that's where it gets ready to be excreted out.
Okay. And how could you better your supply of bacteria within your gut?
So probiotics.
Okay.
So probiotics are the actual like bacteria. We can also have prebiotics. So those are the foods that feed the bacteria. So prebiotics are mostly going to be things like fiber or so like on the greener side, bananas, or you can have a lot of like the soluble and insoluble fibers to help feed that, and it makes like this it's called butyrate, and that's what feeds the colon cells.
Okay.
So that's going to help make it a little healthier and help kind of make it more conducive to good bacteria. So you want more good bacteria to outweigh bad bacteria coming in.
Right.
Yeah.
And you prefer to use like food sources for the probiotics and the prebiotics rather than just having supplements added to your diet or?
So it depends. So it's one of those things where it's like if you have really, really low gut bacteria, then having a supplement might help. I would always try to choose food first if you can, because you have to eat every day. You don't want to be on supplements every day, right? It's like
It can get expensive too.
it gets so expensive. Like people are like, oh, I don't want to waste money on medicines. I'm like, supplements can be just as expensive, guys.
Yeah.
And that's what a supplement is. It's meant to supplement your diet. You're not supposed to eat only that and be like, okay, I'm good for the day, right? So getting it from food first, and then if you're like, I just can't possibly eat all of this yogurt or probiotic food, then yeah, having that supplement is there to give you like a boost in the meantime, but it's not a long-term thing. Supplements shouldn't be a long-term thing unless like you're missing like a portion of your pancreas and you literally just cannot make those enzymes, right? But if it's something that you can do something about, I would get from food first.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And you think like research lists of prebiotic and probiotic foods, or
If you can find ones with a lot of lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, those are two big beneficial ones, because there's so many different subspecies underneath that, right? That's the ones that I would preferably go for, but there's so many different kinds, right?
as far as supplements
Yeah,
or foods?
fruits, both.
Okay.
Yeah, so both will have it.
Okay.
So that's what I would go for.
Okay. All right.
I need to look that up.
I know. I've got some homework to do, Danielle.
And the other thing you mentioned earlier, like a healthy gut is a diverse gut. So also when you're talking about food, like you're not talking about eating the same thing every day. You're like, eat something different. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so that's definitely a privilege thing to eat so many different types of food. And I know it sucks that like to eat healthy is kind of expensive for some people.
Yeah.
So it's trying to do doing what you can with what you have, right? So if someone were to eat an apple every day, I would definitely go for that versus like not eating an apple every day, right? But if you eat an apple one day, an orange the other day, and then a banana, I would choose that over just eating only an apple, because you're adding more phytochemicals, phytonutrients to your body. So you give your body more options for defense, right? If one thing is eliminated, you have another backup, right? So it's making do with what you have. So I do try to keep that in mind, because I did come from like lower income. So when we're looking for foods, we want to look for things that last in the fridge, that are in season, because they will be at their peak nutrient density. And you can usually look at the newsletter at the grocery stores and be like, okay, this is in season, this is why it's on sale. That's what I would use if you're going to shop a little more frugally. And just things in the fridge that last forever, like celery, carrots, potatoes last a while, even outside of the fridge, onions. And a lot of times people give a lot of hate on white potatoes, and I can see why, because it does have a lot of starches in it, but it also is very beneficial because there's B vitamins, there's fiber in the skin. So it's just eating moderately, and moderation is different for each person. So you really have to work with someone to figure out what's your moderate level, right?
We love potatoes.
Yeah, I love
I
potatoes.
had potato for dinner last night.
Okay, well, how would how important is gut health overall, like to, our well-being? Like, how is it connected holistically to who we are?
I think it'd be an understatement to say it's very important. Like, I cannot stress enough how important it is for the rest of the body, just because, like I said, like 70 to 80% of your gut is with 70 to 80% of your immune system is with your gut. So if you're going to try to fight off viruses and all the other pathogens, you need to have that intact as much as you can, right? And then it's your fortress. It's the way that you interact with the outside world. If you have a compromised immune system, it's going to make it hard for you to either have social aspects, to go out and eat certain foods, to just even kind of like live normally and function well if your immune system's not up to par. And then also it affects like your mental health, because anything that goes into your gut system is going to be used by the rest of the body. So your proteins are making your muscles. If you don't have enough protein, then you can kind of like, see some of your muscles wither away a little bit. A lot of the healthy fats, they go into your hair, skin, and nails. They make the sex hormones. So if you're feeling like, okay, well, I'm down in the dumps about certain feelings, it could be because there's a missing nutrient going in or out of your body. And then in general, it just helps you utilize the food that you're eating. So we have to eat every day. So you need to make sure you're using the food to give yourself energy to just even be able to survive and function as a walking, talking person.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's interesting you were talking about muscle because Danielle's boyfriend's really into fitness. And he was like, oh, you have to ask her about, like, what was it?
Oh
Muscle?
my gosh, he had so many questions. He like had just as many questions as we did, like ready to go. Like, ask her about this.
We
ask
were
her
like,
about
yeah,
this.
you want to do the interview? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think he was just talking about like gut health and just like building muscle. I mean, kind of like what you just were kind of saying.
Yeah.
And also just like the chemicals that go into like your mental health as well. Could you get into that a little bit more as far as like the connection to gut health and mental health?
Yeah. So for our mental health, one of the biggest neurotransmitters we think of is serotonin, right? We think about serotonin being our feel good neurotransmitter. It helps us with against like depression and whatnot, right? So in the brain it's a neurotransmitter, but we actually make serotonin down in our gut as well, and we have about, I have to say, 90 to 95%, that's scientists are saying, actually is made in our gut. And this is the ones that are used in the periphery. So the gut has its own supply, and then the body uses the ones that are made in our gut. And from there, it's what helps us make a mucosal barrier, right? So that gut lining I was talking about earlier, it's like this mucus lining. And imagine if you have like a really stuffy nose, right? And something goes in, or dust or whatnot, it gets stuck in that mucus, and then it's expelled. So you want to have that gut lining, have that like mucosal lining there to help kind of like buffer it even more. And serotonin helps with that. So
does the serotonin travel to your brain, or are they completely separate as far as
so because our nervous system, we start with the central nervous system here, and then there's the peripheral one that kind of just travels everywhere in our body. The peripheral one everywhere in the body is what uses the serotonin there. And because serotonin is made from protein. So when protein's broken down into the smallest thing it can be, it's an amino acid. And a lot of like gym people would look into that too, right? So this amino acid, tryptophan, which you might hear about in turkey because everyone only remembers it for turkey, but it's in a bunch of other things like eggs, right? Salmon and spinach and just seeds. So you can get tryptophan from there, because if it's made with a protein, it usually might have tryptophan in there. And then that tryptophan turns into something called 5-HTP, and then 5-HTP turns into serotonin, which is, makes us feel good in our brain, but also in our gut, it'll be what helps build up that gut lining. And then serotonin can then later be turned into melatonin. So that's what helps us with sleep. So they're all interconnected, and it's just like, how do you convert it from this point to this point to this point? So our body has to take that in from our food and then turn it into something else for the rest of our body.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about protein a couple times.
Oh, yeah.
And just, I guess, people wouldn't associate protein with gut health. I feel like that's more for like, again, fitness and like muscle building, but it sounds like it's connected to your gut as well, especially with, creating serotonin.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about food, I think of it in just like the big view is macronutrients. So you have the protein, fats, and fibers, right? And it's gotten to the point where people may have just kind of looked at it like, oh yeah, carbs are bad for you, or like fats are bad for you, and protein's only good for building muscle. But they all have to work together. You can't just only have one. Like when keto diet comes in, and you just think, okay, only fats, but you really have to have at least a good amount of the other ones, right? I mean, so like protein, again, to help build up there's so many things that protein builds up, like your enzyme to break down food and convert other things to other things, right? Like one thing to another. And then like the carbs, I say fiber because a lot of people are not getting enough fiber, but carbs, there's like two different ones that you can think of it as. You have like the quick carbs, which is where it's like very simple sugars, right? You just goes straight into your bloodstream and you can use it for energy.
What are examples of like a quick
Like
carb?
a donut.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Or like you can think of like white potatoes. Those are gonna be quick carbs, because that sugar is just like already as small as it can be, or very close to as small as it can be, and then that just gets converted to energy really fast. And we want that. We want to have an energy source that can be used on demand.
Yeah.
And then we have things like complex carbs, which it takes time for it to kind of extract it to make it into energy because there's the fiber aspect there. And that's what we want if we want to regulate blood sugar. So if you ever ate lunch and you're like, I'm so sleepy right now, I cannot continue working. That's probably because that sugar just went straight into your bloodstream. You used it real fast, and 30 minutes later, you're like, okay, now what? I don't have any more supply. So you want to have that fiber there so that it can kind of like slow down the rate at which the sugars are going into your bloodstream and being used up by your body. So
what would an example of a complex carb be?
So you can think of it like anything with fiber, so like veggies and fruits,
Uh-huh.
they're gonna have a whole bunch of that.
Okay.
And then fats. So a lot of times when people are like, oh, fat's bad for you, that's a very old way of thinking. There are certain fats that are bad, like trans fats, which you think about like fried foods, right?
Mhm.
Saturated fat is like a mixed bag here, just because saturated fats from plants like avocados or coconut, they're great for you. Saturated fats from like animal sources may be a little more risky for people who may have like heart diseases and stuff, so they have to just be a little more careful about it.
Mhm.
But saturated fat, that's the one where in moderation you have to look. It's a very case by case basis.
Yeah.
And then you have healthy fats like omega-3s. You get it from fish, you get it from nuts, you get it from seeds. And that's the one that you want to increase your intake of, because we have like omega-3s versus omega-6s. There's a time and place for both as well, but you want to have it so that it's in a good ratio. If you can do like 1-to-1, that's great, but 3-to-1 ratio of like omega-6 to omega-3 is kind of what scientists might be saying, like, okay, this is more realistic. Just because people are not eating enough of the omega-3s, right? And if you're not a fan of fish, get it from your nuts and seeds. Like chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, a bunch of omega-3s. Just sprinkle that on top of your salad or in your yogurt.
Yeah. Eggs?
Eggs are really good for choline.
Okay.
And that's also the whole like cholesterol factor. Cholesterol is what helps make our sex hormones. Like
Okay.
our sex hormones are made from a cholesterol. So when people are like, I'm just not gonna eat cholesterol stuff at all, I'm like, well, that might affect your sex hormones, your testosterone, your estrogen, which are very needed. So you have to do it in moderation.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, what's the number one question clients often ask you about the gut?
So it's always gonna be, what do I eat to stop X, Y, and Z?
Mhm.
And I always have to be like, okay, well, I need to know the rest of your medical history, because I can't just be like, oh yeah, you have heart problems, just eat this. Just eat these like veggies. And if I didn't know they had like IBS on the side or something like that, then that can cause a lot of irritation. So having like a cookie cutter protocol doesn't work. You have to have someone who works with you to kind of like get the overall picture and be like, okay, usually this is the general thing. So general things are what you use as a baseline, right? But then from there, you kind of like tease out from their like intake and their history and be like, okay, so well, you have this in your genetics, you have this in family history, right? This relationship aspect might be affecting it. The way that you have time to make food affects what we can recommend to you. So that's usually what they're asking. It's just like, what could I eat for this? What do I eat for this? And I'm like, it depends.
Looking for an easy fix.
Yeah. Or like it's the magic pill where they're like, what's the one thing I can eat? And I'm like, there's not really one thing. It's kind of like a collective thing. It works better together rather than like one pill. So yeah.
Well, what would you recommend to someone that is kind of looking to find a practitioner to help them with their health? I know personally, like I've had a really hard time finding people I can like trust and feel like I can really like just talk about my health with. I feel like I've had bad experiences, and I know a lot of people that have had similar experiences. So how would you recommend someone find someone that they can really trust with talking through this about their health?
This is where comparing the different practitioners is really important, and then looking into their credentials, and then actually just calling them up, because a lot of practitioners, at least in private practice I can talk about, they offer 15, 20-minute consults, complimentary consults, right? And so it's free, so you might as well just do it just to be like, hey, are we a good fit together? So you can get to know their philosophy behind things. You can be like, do you offer this, this, and this? Or how would you approach this? So asking those questions may help you a lot more. And if you say like, oh, I have this problem, what would you do to help me with it? And they'll give you kind of like a overall plan. They won't know for sure, because again, they don't know your entire history. But they'll say like, oh, I can try this, I can try this. If that's something you're up to, that's great. If it's something that you're like, no, I don't want to just do that, and you just look for another person, right? And then when it comes to like hospital systems, because it's hard to get in touch with the doctor directly there, you can go for like the first visit, and if you don't like it, then you can always switch to another practitioner as well, because you want someone that you're comfortable with, and that humanistic relationship that you make with the person taking care of you, right? Like it's important. You don't want to feel like, oh, this person doesn't listen to me. If they're not listening to you, you need to move to another doctor.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
true. And it's a process. Like it's not like you come in one day, like you said, and you have this magic answer and then they're cured. Like it's someone you're gonna have to keep cultivating a relationship and coming back to and trusting and yeah. Thank you for that advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to use your gut instinct as far as like, is this person a good fit for me or not? Don't just, oh, they're the expert, they know what they're talking about, trust yourself too, I think, as far as choosing a practitioner, like you said. One thing I wanted to ask that's not on our list, but I'm curious, how does stress like affect the gut? Because I feel like we're talking about environment a lot and day-to-day life experience, and I'm like, I think, when it comes to someone being like, what's the magic food that's gonna fix me? But like you said, like, what's your life like? What's your, we live in such a high stress world. I know for me, when I'm stressed, like my digestion just like slows way down.
So you hit it right on the head right there. So for stress, everyone, whenever they're like, oh yeah, it might just be due to stress, and they kind of just like, they know that it's a factor, but they don't really do too much about it. And that's where like being a CNS helps a lot, because we do have to take stress into consideration, and that's one of our recommendations, like how to manage stress as well. So when we're stressed, we're constantly in what's known as the fight or flight system, right? Like a lot of people know fight or flight, but they may not understand that there's another side to that nervous system, and that's rest and digest. And that's the part that a lot of people ignore. They only know fight and flight, but then they forget there's rest and digest. And that's called like the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system for the science nerds out there. And when you're in the stress kind of side of things, you're like stuck in the fight or flight mode. You're always alert. You're always like high strung, and you're like, what's the next thing to do? What's the next thing to like think about? And you're never actually relaxing, because when you're relaxing, you're also being able to digest well. So think about like back in the day when we're running away from like a tiger or something like that, right? You're not gonna have time to just sit and digest your food or like relax. There's literally imminent danger right there. But nowadays, that imminent danger comes in the form of like deadlines, or like, what do I need to do for tomorrow to get ready for my kids' next day at school or something like that, right? So stress is gonna vary between each person, and stress is also like perceived for some people as well, because if you perceive it as stress, it's gonna be stressful to you. Whereas like other people, if they kind of just change their way of thinking about it, they're like, okay, this is not gonna stress me out, because everyone's gonna be stressed. It's the way you bounce back from it. It's how resilient you are to the stress that we have to work on. Because everyone's gonna have that coming in. It's just like, how are you gonna respond to it, right? So if you're like, if you don't have the resources, or if you don't have a way to manage it, then yeah, you're gonna be very, very stressed out. But if you're like, you know what, I'm prepared for this. I have like backup here from friends and family. I have someone I can talk to about this. That could be a way to be like, okay, I know the stress is coming on to me, but I have a way to get it off or get it away, right? And this is where it goes into gut-brain axis or gut-brain connection as well. There's something known as the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So that's the two portions in the brain, the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Kind of think of it like the master gland up here, and I talk to our adrenal glands that sit on top of our kidneys, right? So they're talking all the time. Whenever you're stressed out, it's gonna be like, okay, you're high alert. Everything must pause until I get this danger away. But then when you have like, so cortisol is a stress hormone, right? And that's gonna increase and just be at a really high level. And cortisol is good because you wanna be alert, but you don't wanna be alert chronically. You want it to be able to go down so that at the end of the night, you can relax. At the end of the night, you can, digest all your food well as you sleep and rejuvenate and get ready for the next day. But a lot of times people are like, I'm just gonna ignore sleeping, I'm just gonna ignore eating well. And I'm just kind of like, why are you doing that? Because if I think about the three main things in our life that we have to do every day, we have to eat every day, we have to sleep to relax and rejuvenate, and moving is another thing. So having some kind of movement is essential, because that's what our muscles are meant to do, right? And when I say moving, I don't mean, oh yeah, hit the gym. Going on the stairs, walking around, just making use of the muscles on your body to just, be active in general. But what are the three things that people ignore every day? They ignore their diet, they're not sleeping because they have to just stay awake and, do whatever else, and then they're not moving as much. So those three essentials, they continue functioning because they are essential. We have to do it every day, so our body will still continue. But as we get older, it catches up to us. And that's when it's like, okay, well, I have to do something about it now. But that's where preventative medicine comes in, because if you do it early on, it's not going to be as bad as if you never did it. And all of a sudden, it's like, bam, it hits you all at once when you're, 65.
Yeah.
Right?
And I guess you're giving some tips right now, but as far as like how, just in a generic sense, how people can better their own gut health, do you have any recommendations for that? I know it's very individualistic and all of that, but like you said, I think sleeping, eating, and moving are like great tips right there. Like you said, so many people ignore that.
So one way is try to shift over to the rest and digest mode. You can do that through I know a lot of people are like, oh, this is like voodoo things, but
we're very into that.
But you can do breath work.
Uh-huh.
So that's where you think about like, okay, the number of breaths that come in does matter. So like when you're really stressed out, right? A lot of people do shallow breathing. They're just like, oh my gosh, and it's very, very shallow. And you want to get it in so that it's like calm at a steady pace, and that's signaling to your body, okay, I'm not in danger. I can finally relax. So taking in a deep breath, because you think about it, when's the last time you took a deep breath? A deep enough breath.
I was all.
Yeah.
Am I breathing?
So like a deep enough breath that it goes into your belly. So deep belly breathing, so you like, and like the air, you can feel it going into your stomach, and then breathing it all out, like expel as much as you can from your lungs. So that's one deep belly breath, right? There's also methods like 4-7-8 or 5-5-5 for maintenance. So 4-7-8 is like you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, and then exhale as much as you can within the 8 seconds. Sometimes it's a little hard for people, so they just do 5-5-5. So like breathe in for 5, hold for 5, release for 5. Right? So by controlling the amount of air that comes in and out of your body, it kind of like in a way tricks your nervous system to be like, okay, let me try to shift over to the rest and digest side. It tells your body to like slow down. Like when a lot of people are like, take a step back and just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
So that's another way of thinking about it too. So just having that air come in and out. So another way is like other ways that you control breathing is humming, singing. If you want to gargle, because you have to control how much air goes in, otherwise you're choking. So those are all little things that you can do as well. Yeah. In terms of other things other than breath work for healthy gut, you said?
Yeah.
Again, diversity of your gut bacteria, having pre and probiotics, hydrating. People are not hydrating enough. And especially if I tell someone like, oh yeah, you need to increase your intake of fruits and veggies or just fiber in general. When you increase fiber, you need to increase water. Because think about it like when you're eating these fibrous things, right? It's like asking someone to eat a bunch of twigs and leaves and whatnot. And it really is, you're eating leaves. And then if you're not drinking water with it, it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm just kind of clogged up with leaves right now. And you need to have like the water kind of like be like a river to wash it down and make it easier for you to process all this stuff. Otherwise, you become really constipated.
That makes a lot of sense. That's
Yeah,
something Sean, your boyfriend, was talking about. He's like, ask her about water. I'm sure she's gonna say drink lots of water.
So for water, like a good rule of thumb is whatever your body weight is, divide it by 2, and that's how much water you would want in fluid ounces. So if someone's like, for some reason, if someone's like 120 pounds, right, 60 fluid ounces, right? So that's just a little under 8 cups of water, because in 1 cup is 8 fluid ounces.
I'm looking at my water bottle right now. It has 64 ounces. I'm like, I need to be drinking a lot more water than this.
Yeah, so, but you also have to be careful. You don't want to drink more than like 100 fluid ounces unless someone tells you to, which is, it can be dangerous because if you have too much water, it gets rid of your electrolytes. So that can make you like really dizzy, or like you're like, I'm not feeling so good. Because it washes away a lot of water-soluble vitamins and whatnot. So, and the electrolytes there. So you want to have just the right amount of water, but not too little and not too much.
Yeah.
So that's a good rule of thumb.
Everything in balance.
Yeah, I know, exactly, right? So half your body weight in fluid ounces is your water intake, recommended water intake for it. And I don't recommend someone go from like 0 cups of water to like 8. That would just, you have to go low and slow. Start very slowly and do like 2 cups one day and then 3 cups the next day or next week or something like that.
Oh my gosh, I hope people are having at least 2 cups of water.
I hope that, yeah, you'd be surprised.
I know. Well, that's something that's so interesting is how, like, I feel like a lot of people are interested in their health, but I feel like it's becoming more mainstream where people are like, oh, I'm in control of how I feel. This is fascinating. Like, really looking at their own daily habits. So hopefully people, I know I'm learning a lot from this episode.
I know.
I'm like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, we kind of already talked about this, but what are some habits that people do that diminish a gut? And I know we said like lack of sleeping, like all those things. Are there any other things that you mentioned?
There's so many other things that can happen. Like someone walks into the office like, this happened to me. I'm like, oh, okay. So the biggest one is inflammation. If you cause inflammation in your gut, it's going to like break down that gut barrier that we're talking about. And it's really important to have that gut barrier there because it leads to what's known as intestinal permeability. Just imagine having holes in your walls, right?
Mhm.
Some people call it leaky gut because the food that should stay in your GI tract gets leaked out into your bloodstream or like areas that where it shouldn't be, right? So you want to have that really strong buffer there. And things that can inflame or inflame by weakening, right?
Yeah.
Can be like things like alcohol, trans fats, refined foods, and just not having enough fiber to feed those colon cells to like help boost it up from the other end, right? So those are all things that can diminish your healthy gut.
So when you're talking about the gut lining, I'm thinking about just again with my mainstream brain over here. It's like, so those are like gut healthy things that are like healthy for the gut. Those things build the barrier. Correct?
Yeah. So you have the cells here that help, like, they look like little fingers, to be honest. It looks like little fingers on your small intestinal area, and that helps absorb those nutrients in. And then you have like this layer on top, right? This mucosal layer, that's the barrier that's protecting the actual intestinal cells that are absorbing your food in.
So so again, because I have to be aware of my I'm trying, how do I use this gracefully? But like, how regular I am when I go to the bathroom and, making sure my gut feels good and I'm not like bloating and all of that because that can happen really quickly. So I guess I'm just trying to differentiate and just understand. So when you have your gut lining healthy, is that when you were going to the bathroom regularly, or?
I mean, that's one side of it. Like if you're doing regular bowel movements, so people say that you can do like 1 or 3 bowel movements every day. When you start seeing it kind of like if someone's going like once a week, that's a problem because you're not getting rid of the toxins or the excess things that are accumulating in your body because it's not just like food debris there. You have hormones in there, you have cholesterol in there, you have red blood cells that are broken down into the smallest parts and then it goes into your matter that's there. And if you're not getting rid of that, that's literally just staying in your body again. So I deal with a lot of gut disorders, but I also do a lot of hormones. So one of them is like estrogen. If you're not excreting as often as you should be, that estrogen can recirculate into your body and that leads to what's known as estrogen dominance. So that's something we have to be aware of as well. So having regular bowel movements is key. I also do nutrition focused physical exams because based on your skin, your hair, your nails, just outer appearance things, you can see if there's any kind of deficiency in your body. So maybe you're eating healthy foods, but your body's not processing it. So that's another way to look at it, just because you're eating healthy foods, but nothing's improving. So at that point, it's kind of like, well, is something anatomically wrong? Is something in my body not producing enough enzymes to break it down, these good foods down, right? So an example is if I have nail polish on, but on your nails, if you see little white spots on it, that could be an indicator of a zinc deficiency. Doesn't mean for sure you have it, it's just an indicator. Or straight lines that are very, very defined, like fuse lines, that could be indicators of for your nails, not enough protein, not enough iron or zinc. Fatty, if your nails are really brittle and they just kind of break apart, if your hair is very brittle, if your skin's kind of really dried out all the time, maybe you don't have enough healthy fats to kind of keep it healthy and supple. So all these things can show up on your skin, right? It's kind of you go how you eat, and it's very true. So it can show up there, for your muscles. If you're not building enough muscle, maybe there's not enough protein coming in. If you're feeling I have a lot of brain fog or I have a lot of irritability going on, maybe you're not utilizing sugar the way you should, right? Or your energy levels are really low, sugar is not being utilized the way it should. So all of those things come into play.
Wow.
Sorry, I just unloaded a lot of you.
No, we're just soaking it all up. We're just analyzing ourselves now. I'm looking at my nails.
It's just an indicator. It's not a for sure thing.
So when you talk about the lines on your nails, are you talking about
straight up and down lines? It becomes more prominent when you're older, just because you age.
Yeah.
But if it's very defined, or if you have anything going horizontally, or if you have divots in your nails, like someone just went this with your nail and you have a divot there, that's an indicator that you have something going on. Your nails are not strong enough to keep itself up. That's just one thing.
Interesting. Yeah. And that was for protein?
It could be protein because protein makes keratin. Yeah, so keratins are hair, skin, and nails. Or it could be fats if you don't have enough fats to help keep it hydrated enough. Yeah.
Would you recommend like a blood test to know for sure someone's levels? Like, is that when you work with people, is that one of the first things you do
So,
to like, for sure see what's going
labs
on?
can be expensive, so it's up to them if they want to do it. If they have labs, blood test comes from like a lot of their physicians, right? So if the hospital is already gonna cover it because they have insurance through them, or if the doctor's like, yeah, you need to have a routine blood test because of whatever reason, then that's good to have on hand to see, like, especially if they're having blood sugar dysregulation, you can look at hemoglobin A1C, because that looks over a 3-month span. But if it's more like specialty labs, like stool tests, food sensitivity, hormone tests, that's something where you have to look into a specific practitioner to do those and interpret the labs, which I can do as well. But labs are expensive, so we try to work with food first, unless I want to have a better look at it at like a cellular level.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I feel like protein has been a key brain.
It's
But
okay,
it's been such
it's
a big
okay.
discussion in our lives just because, we're both been vegetarian for
Mhm.
years, vegan at times, and then as we've gotten older, just kind of, having these conversations, but then also kind of looking at like what our bodies need medicinally
Mhm.
has really kind of shifted our perspective on those lifestyles. So I'm curious how you feel about, is it possible as a vegan or vegetarian to get all the nutrients you need?
Yeah, definitely. So for vegan, vegetarian specifically, you need to have B12. That's the main thing that you probably already know about. Supplementing with that as well, because it's hard to get it from food sources. B12 is usually found in the animal-based things, unfortunately. But unless you get things that are fortified or you have it in a supplement form, that's one that I would kind of have to be like, okay, this is definitely a supplement thing. Otherwise, protein, you can get it from a bunch of different plant foods. It's not just like, whenever people think of protein, they think of, okay, animal source. I'm like, no, you can definitely get tofu, edamame, beans, nuts, and seeds, right? Soy-based things. So there's a lot of different protein sources that are coming from plants. You just might have to eat more of them and combine them, because this is one of those cases where an animal might have all the essential amino acids that are made from proteins, whereas plants, they might have some, so you have to combine them together. So that's what's done as complementary proteins. So one of them is like, the most common example is rice and beans. They work really well together because it makes a complete protein source, whereas like if you have an animal source, it's already gonna have it because it's meat,
Yeah.
right? So for vegans and vegetarians, I would look into complementary proteins and just combine as many different types of plant proteins together, so you're kind of covering most of your bases.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
good to know.
And if that's too much, you can always do a protein powder.
Yes.
Yeah, just supplement it that way. I basically live off of rice and beans, so I'm like,
Okay.
cool. I'm good to go.
Yeah, our order at a Mexican food restaurant is just like the kids' burrito, beans, rice, and cheese burrito.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do the job.
You're fed. All right, well, we often talk about the importance of the intuition and listening to your gut. Have you ever thought about how the gut affects our ability to feel those internal messages?
Yes, so there's a whole there's a whole branch of what's known as intuitive eating. So if you find like a practitioner, like a nutritionist, whether they're a dietitian or CNS and whatnot, and they specialize in intuitive eating or they know about it, that's something I would ask them as well, because if you're looking for someone who can help you be more in tune with that, that's something I would look into, just because like for intuitive eating, there's a lot of different principles that come into play. So one of them is rejecting the diet mentality. So you don't want to have your diet dictate your life. In the long run, a diet shouldn't even be there. A diet's more like a short-term thing to kind of jumpstart you and kind of get you into a better lifestyle. Because I don't even like to use the word diet anymore, because it's just kind of like, if you're starting to eat healthy or eat more nutrient-dense things in general every day, is that even a diet anymore if you're doing it every day? It's just your regular day eating, right? So when you're eating, eat it because you want to be strong. Eat it because you want more energy, not just to lose weight. Like that could be a byproduct of healthy eating, but it shouldn't be your main focus to like live up to the expectations of whatever society is telling you. So rejecting that diet mentality is the first thing. Another one is to honor your hunger and also honor your satiety drive. Satiety being like your fullness, right? Because intuitively, we have a hunger drive. Our body would be like, you haven't eaten for 3 days. You need to eat now. Like we have that drive there. It's just built into us. And that's what makes us go out to seek food. So when you're hungry, eat, right? You need to honor your body when you're hungry instead of being like, I'm gonna try to lose weight by starving myself. Like, no, it's not gonna work that way. You have to feed yourself, because there's what's known as the BMR, basal metabolic rate. That's just the amount of calories you need to function as a human living being. Like when you wake up and your heart's pounding and your eyes are open and your like brain starts to turn on and think, even when you're sleeping, this is happening. But you need a certain amount of calories just to be alive, to sustain yourself. And a lot of times when people are like, oh, well, I have 1,200 calories a day, you know, like a 3-year-old needs 1,200 calories. And if you're like 30 years old, you definitely need way more than that, because you have to take into account what's known as your TE, total energy expenditure. Because you're not just gonna, I mean, hopefully we're not vegetables in bed yet, because you're gonna get up, you're gonna walk around, you're gonna think every day, and that takes energy. So you have to take into account your BMR plus the amount of energy that you're being active with, right? So there's an activity level factor that you multiply it together, and then that gives you a certain number of calories. So when you look on the back of a label, it says like based on the average 2,000 calorie diet. Not everyone's at 2,000 calories, right? So you can always calculate this out online, BMR calculator, and then you just look to see what your activity level is, and you can use that as a baseline. I don't go by calories because I don't think it's like a good way to dictate your life with numbers, but it's a good way when you're starting out, just kind of get a baseline and be like, okay, if my TEE is saying that I have to have 1,800 calories, so 1,800, to just be alive, and also taking into account my activity levels, I know that's a little under 2,000. So if I'm looking at a food and it says like, oh, one serving is, I don't know, 14 chips, and I could be like, okay, well, a little under that is probably my level. That's how I would go by. I wouldn't be like, okay, a medium apple is, I don't know, 200 calories. But a medium apple is gonna be different for each person. Like if I thought of a medium apple, I think about it like this, but someone else might be like, oh, it's like this. So I don't go by calories. I go more by like eating patterns.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it as like, when you're eating, for most of it, try to do as best as you can to eat as nutrient dense as you can. But the other 20%, so I think about 80-20, right? 80% of the time, eat as well as you can, and then the other 20%, just eat what you want. Eat what makes you happy, just because we're all human. Like when people think about me and they're like, oh, you're a nutritionist, you must eat healthy all the time. No, I don't. So I love tiki bars, and I love like cheeseburgers and ice cream and stuff like that. But I do try to be as conscientious as I can to incorporate all these good foods for my gut health. But you know, when you're celebrating out with someone, or when it's a special occasion, eat what you want. Like if you're going on vacation, don't think about like, oh my gosh, how much fiber am I getting in? You can be conscientious of it, but it doesn't have to be like I have to eat healthy every day of my life, right? Because you want to be able to eat so that it fulfills you for your energy needs, but also like mentally it makes you feel good because you're like, I'm enjoying this food, right? I'm enjoying the people I'm eating with. So when you think about like 20% of the whole year, it's about 73 days. So if there's 52 weeks in a year and you chose every Saturday for whatever reason to eat, you know, whatever you wanted, you still have days to spare.
Yeah.
Just the majority of the time, try to eat as healthy as you can.
Yeah. That sounds like being very like intentional with how you.
It is.
You know?
It is. Yeah, and then just being like listening to your cues. So if you're eating and you're hungry, eat because you're hungry. If you start getting full, check in with yourself and be like, okay, am I actually eating because I'm full now, or am I still hungry? And then it's also like saying like, I don't know, are you eating because you're bored? Like, why are you eating right now? Are you actually hungry, or are you bored? Are you sad? So you can think about it like that. And intuitive eating also says to be kind to yourself, because we're our own harshest critic. And when we're eating, and then all of a sudden someone's like, Lillie, I'm so sorry. Like I like binged on this day, and I'm like, it's okay. That's your 20%, or even if it's more than 20%, it's okay. Like I'm not gonna judge you for that. Because it's just up to them, like if they want to treat themselves nicely or not. Because if they're not going to be nice to themselves, who else is going to be nice? I mean, other people can, but you want to be your biggest supporter, right? And when it comes to eating food, you know, you're doing it because you want to feed yourself. You're not trying to like eat this cake because you're trying to impress someone else, hopefully. So yeah, just being as nice as you can to yourself.
Yeah.
Whether it's because the food you're eating is good for you or bad for you. You just want to, you know, take it in and be like, okay, I'm eating this because it fulfills me in multiple ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great philosophy to have, because realistically, you know, you only live once. Like, eat what you want. Like,
enjoy it.
Life is too short. Yeah, but at the same time, you want to be supporting your body and making sure that while you are here, you have the energy and you are healthy. healthy. So
And I feel like too, like when you're stressed out, again, going back to stress, when you're stressed out when you're eating that thing, your body's gonna have a reaction to it, right?
Yeah, so you can think of it like you can either make food information and making your body saying like, okay, like this food is good for me, I'm gonna turn it into this thing that I can use. Or you can make food inflammation. So certain foods are way more inflammatory than others. So you can choose what you want. Like depending on like your health, maybe your body can handle a certain amount of like inflammatory foods if you balance it out with something else. Like if you know you're gonna eat not so great tomorrow because I don't know, you're having a really good party. And you're like, well, tomorrow's not gonna be my average day, but if you have like, again, overall eating pattern, you're like, I generally eat pretty good, and all the foods that I'm eating have a lot of like these beneficial plant nutrients in it, they can help fight off whatever quote unquote bad foods they're eating the next day. Again, I don't go by bad foods or good foods, it's more just like some are more nutrient dense, some are more inflammatory than others. It's just your choice. And you can choose. You choose what it is, right?
What would you consider like an inflammatory food?
Alcohol. As much as a lot of people like alcohol and whatnot, it is inflammatory. But you can always try to do it in moderation, right? Like the recommendation for men and women. For men, it's 2 standard drinks. For women, it's 1 standard drink. And a lot of times people will go over. So it's always trying to like either balance it out by like having extra fiber or having something that's a lot of antioxidants, a lot of anti-inflammatory nutrients in it. So things like berries, and the darker the color in a fruit and vegetable, like the vivid color, that color's not there just for looks. I mean, it looks great, but those are the nutrients in it that help fight off these illnesses and disease. So those are the antioxidants and those are the anti-inflammatories in the food that you can use to kind of like combat the inflammation from these inflammatory foods. So I would also go for berries if you can. Berries are really high in anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. We've learned a lot.
You learned so much. I'm like trying to soak it all up.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. That's the point. People are like, did I talk too much on the episode? And I'm like, that's the point. Like, fill it with as much information as you can. We're here for it.
All right.
Yeah. So is there any advice that you would give your younger self as far as anything, What comes to mind? Yeah.
My first one is don't be shy. It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst that someone can say is no. And growing up, I would be so shy. Just be like, it would like prevent me from doing anything. I'd be like, I can't do it. I don't want to. When they get angry at me, I was like, why would they get angry? They don't even know you. And I'm like, I'm just a kid. They're more lenient towards kids. And the next one is just being flexible. So this is where we get into like the whole don't only think in black and white. Being flexible will help you adapt, will help you learn from things, and just being open to other thoughts. Like you're not the only one who thinks like this, right? Other people may have the same kind of thinking and other people may not. And it's okay if they don't. It's just kind of like respecting that boundary there for each person and trying to see like what are the best aspects you can get from each person. And that can make you grow better because you're getting the best of both worlds, right? And then the one that's a little more nerdy is that your cells in your body, the ones that can regenerate, like your skin, your liver, and like your hair and whatnot, and your intestines, it's almost like getting a new body every 7 to 10 years. So if you're like, hey, my body or whatever, for whatever reason, don't do that. It's not nice to you. Again, be nice to yourself. But also if you feel like, okay, I want to become a new person, you get a new body about 7 to 10 years. So it's just like, okay, you do grow out of it. You get another chance to like be a new person. You can do that at any point in your life. But it just happens that you get a lot of cells that basically rejuvenate themselves every, decade or so.
Yeah, so interesting.
So I know. Like, how many people have I been? This is interesting.
Mentally, like 100, but physically. So, what does living authentically mean to you?
I think that means just being a lot of people will say this, just being as true to yourself as you can. Don't let other people's opinions shape you too much. Like, you do have your core values in place, and that one, they can shift every so often, but like you can take the considerations of others into play, but don't let it like completely shift you off your pedestal, right? Like you have to stand strong and be like, okay, you know what? Like I do this for me and I want to be happy because of this, right? So that's how you can kind of like live as true to yourself as possible. That's how I think it. I don't know.
Totally. Real quick, I want to ask, do you feel comfortable sharing just like a couple of things that people could do for their gut health, like to ingest, you know what I mean, like ginger,
Yeah, so ginger,
Okay.
garlic, if you can handle these. Because
Uh-huh.
a lot of these herbs and spices, they're completely underutilized. When you want to make food taste better,
Yeah.
you utilize those herbs and spices because that's what goes into like a lot of these supplements, and pharmaceutical drugs actually are made from a lot of these as well. But when people are when they're starting to begin their health journey and they're like, oh, I hate the way veggies taste. That makes sense because a lot of veggies are bitter.
Yeah.
But that bitterness is actually the good stuff actually that
Yeah.
helps fight off the bad things in your body. So I would always try to recommend increasing the flavor profile with spices and herbs that you may not have ever tried before. Try adding cumin, try adding like dill or cilantro if you can handle that. Red chili flakes, whatnot, right? So sprinkle it with a little more of that instead of using salt, because there's so many other things you can add to it that makes it taste good. And then for your fruits and veggies, it's so underwhelming how many fruits and veggies people are eating a day. So you have to try to aim for about 5 to 7 servings a day, and a serving's gonna look different for each person, but you can always use like your fist or 1 cup's worth as kind of like an equivalent. So if you have about 5 to 7 of those a day, you're kind of in a good place. For some people, they're like, that's completely insane. How am I supposed to eat 7 cups of these veggies? You can eat them as snacks. You can eat them as part of your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It could be your dessert instead. And then another thing is like you have to take into account for vegetables that are really fluffy, right? Like spinach. When you cook down spinach, it turns into nothing. So 1 cup of raw spinach is equivalent to half a cup of cooked spinach. It's the same amount, it's just smaller volume. So that's what I would recommend if they wanted to increase their gut health there. And drinking enough water. Water is really important here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for people listening that are interested in working with you, how can they connect with you and find you?
So they can go on my contact page of gutcompassnutrition.com, and then they can just email me of any help. If they just need like a quick question, they're like, hey, I heard you on this podcast, just send me an email and I'll answer it. But if it's more something like in-depth conversation, then you can make a consult with me out there.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll include the link in the show notes so people can find you if they're
Okay.
interested.
We'll add your Instagram too.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thanks guys.
Thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I feel like we learned so much.
Thank you.
All right, and for anyone listening, thank you for joining us this week. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Yay!
You said it.
Oh my goodness.
Good
Am I talking
job.
to you now?
No, that was so good. The more
Yay.
information, the better. You did a great job.
I was like, how do I not overwhelm with too many words?